Welcome to NOAA Live. My name is Grace Simpkins, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is sponsored by NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, which is spread across the country and helps connect people to all that NOAA does. It's also sponsored by Woods Hole Sea Grant, where I work, which is located at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution here on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. NOAA Live webinars will be offered most Wednesdays during the school year at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And to find out about upcoming webinars, simply visit our website or follow us on Facebook. Now, this series is designed to help you get to know NOAA and some of our incredible experts. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And today, it is my pleasure to be introducing you to Samir Patel with NOAA's Northeast Fisheries Science Center here in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, where I am as well. Now, while we'll be talking about NOAA's role in sea turtle research, we want to recognize that we are all coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. We acknowledge that Samir is coming to us, and we are hosting this webinar from the ancestral lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gay-Hedaquina. A few guidelines before I hand it over to Samir. You are all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and we want to make sure we can hear him. However, that box where you wrote where you're from, please write your questions as we go along. I'll be keeping track of them for Samir, and I will ask them. He'll stop periodically and we'll go through as many questions as we can. If you are a teacher with a classroom, please just make sure you write the name of the student so we can give them a shout out as we ask their question. All right, enough of me talking at this point. I am going to hand it over to Samir at this point. It's all you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for attending the talk. Thank you to NOAA and Woods Hole Oceanographic for inviting me, and to one of our major partners in this work, Coonamessett Farm Foundation. All this research is done in collaboration with NOAA and CFF is what it's called. And today I'm going to be talking about what it's like to see the world through the eyes of a sea turtle. Before I get started, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from outside of Philadelphia. That's me there, the little guy with the purple and green jacket. And ever since I was a little kid, I've had a really, really strong fascination with wildlife and wild animals. And when I was young, I was able to go on a safari in Africa and sort of nurture that interest in wildlife. And after that, I went through school. I went to college. I went to graduate school. And in graduate school, I had my first experience studying sea turtles. I studied loggerhead turtles in Greece. And then I got a chance to study leatherback turtles in South Africa and green turtles in Costa Rica. And so I've been to many places around the world studying sea turtles. And now I study sea turtles in the Northwest Atlantic. So this is the Northwest Atlantic. Does anybody have any idea what sea turtles we have here? If you do, start writing it in the box, and maybe Grace can sort of shout out some names, and I'll keep talking for a little bit here. So the Northwest Atlantic is this part of the Atlantic Ocean that covers the US eastern seaboard and the Canadian coastline as well, on the east coast of Canada. And that yellow star there is where I work and I'm based. And we study sea turtles from that area there along the Massachusetts coastline, south all the way to North Carolina. And we see a variety of sea turtles within that area. Anybody have any guesses on some sea turtles?
All right, this is Grace reporting from the chat box. I told Samir that you're a savvy crew. So we do have some folks here. Michelle says olive ridley. Michael says loggerhead. Abigail says Kemp's ridley. And Brian also thinks that there are Kemp's ridley here. Any other species? So we have green sea turtles. Brian says green sea turtles. And Brian also says loggerhead.
So those are all great guesses. Olive ridleys, we don't have olive ridleys here, but we do have Kemp's, we have greens, we have leatherbacks, and we have loggerheads. So the first turtle, the leatherback turtle I just mentioned, they're a huge turtle, and I'll be talking about them in more detail later on. Then another turtle we have in the area is the loggerhead turtle. I'll again be talking about them a little bit later on, but I actually have a specimen to show you guys that I think you guys might like to see. So this is a loggerhead turtle. The loggerheads that come up to our area tend to be juveniles and adults, so they're like 15 years and older, and they tend to be brown, and they have a big head, which is why they're called loggerheads, and they have a big beak, which they use to crush really hard animals like crabs and scallops and mussels, and they're a pretty hardy turtle. They're big, and they tend to be in a lot of different parts of the world. And again, I'll talk about them a little bit more as we move along. The next turtle is the Kemp's Ridley, and I have one of those to show you guys as well. And the Kemp's Ridley, the ones that we get here are much smaller. So they are younger turtles. They're less than 10 years old usually. They also have a pretty amazing beak, and they eat similarly to what loggerheads do. They sort of crunch on harder animals, mussels, crabs, things like that. And the ones we get here are really young, like I said, and the issues that they have here, I'll talk about a little bit later, but we get that unique crowd of very young Kemp's Ridleys. Normally, they'd be in the Gulf of Mexico. That's where they all end up, and that's where they usually end up growing. But up here, we kind of get a few of the younger ones that like to venture off on their own. And then the next turtle is the green turtle, which is pictured there, and I have one of those as well. And the green turtles are very pretty turtles. They have a sunburst pattern on their shell when they're young, and similar to the Kemps, we get younger green turtles coming up to our area. They're the same as the Kemps. They are younger turtles that like to venture off away from the pack a little bit. Green turtles are generally found in tropical waters, and they don't have as substantial a beak. They eat seagrass, so their jaw is just a little bit different. They have a smaller head than the loggerhead, but they grow to be very big. They tend to be the second largest sea turtle. First the leatherback, then usually green turtles, and then loggerheads. So they can grow to be very big animals. But again, we get the smaller ones in our area. So let's get back to the slides. So all sea turtles are considered protected species. So what that means is they tend to have a lot of threats in the environment that lead to injury and harm. And a lot of these threats usually lead to a decrease in their population. And for leatherbacks, one of the big threats to them is called vertical line entanglements. So fishing gear that's stuck to the bottom of the ocean has to have some indicator that it's there, so fishermen know how to retrieve it, where it is. And that indicator usually is a line, a rope in the water, and a buoy at the surface. And that rope tends to be kind of loose. And so large animals like leatherback turtles and like whales get entangled in that line. And that entanglement can wrap their flippers, it can wrap around their neck. And when it does that, it can really hurt the turtle. And so that's one of the major things that we see for leatherback impact within our very local environment, within the Massachusetts waters. It also happens to whales, and it is becoming a major issue. And a lot of organizations are working towards figuring out ways to remove that vertical line from the water. There are other fisheries impacts that sea turtles deal with. Loggerheads, that's a loggerhead, for example, they get caught in fishing gear. And in this example, this turtle was caught in a dredge. And so a dredge is something that scours the bottom of the ocean, picking up what it can. And this dredge was picking up scallops. So all around that turtle are scallops. And the scallop industry has done a very good job at mitigating or dealing with that issue by changing their gear. And Coonamessett Farm Foundation, in fact, was a big part in introducing gear to help improve the scallop industry from catching loggerheads. So they work really hard at making sure that they don't impact sea turtles anymore. But there are other fisheries out there. There are nets in the water that catch turtles. There are other types of gear that scour through the ocean catching turtles. And so fishing can be a big problem for sea turtles in the ocean. Now, very local to Massachusetts, Long Island, very local to New England, can be this occasional cold stunning event that we get of specifically Kemp's green turtles and occasional loggerheads. And what happens is sea turtles require the ocean to warm their body, especially small ones. And if the water gets too cold, then the turtles become stiff and they kind of get into a sleepy state and they just drift onto the shore. And it happens particularly to the smaller ones that have not made it back south in the winter. Typically, turtles come here in the summer, they feed, and then they go back south in the winter. But sometimes turtles don't make it in time. And so when the temperature drops too quickly for the turtles, they become into this cold stun state and they drift onto the shore. And we have a really amazing group of volunteers in Massachusetts run by the Mass Audubon Society that collects these turtles and helps them survive. And about 80% survive. And this year is looking to be a pretty big year. We already have about 650, 680 turtles that have stranded. There's still about 4 to 6 weeks left of those events. And if you do walk the beaches locally in Massachusetts or Long Island or some of these other places where cold stunning occurs, there are phone numbers you can call to contact your local, what's called a stranding network, so that you can tell them that there are sea turtles that are stranded. And then the last concern for sea turtles, but also general wildlife, generally everything on Earth, is climate change. And like I said, temperature really impacts sea turtles. And these are maps of the rising sea surface temperature, so the temperature of the ocean surface over the next set of years. And red means warmer. And as you can see, going through the set of years and decades there, everything's kind of getting a little redder. So if things keep getting warm, that has a really strong impact on a lot of different things. It's called a cascading effect. So like prey will start moving out of the area. Turtles might shift where they want to be because it might be too warm for them, or the temperature might not fit what they prefer. And so other parts of climate change include increased hurricane effect, and that can destroy nesting beaches. So climate change is just a very large impact to the whole global ecosystem, and sea turtles are not immune to that, just like anything else. So before I go on and specifically talk about some of the work I do and some more specific details about turtles, are there any questions?
I'm so glad you stopped because there are questions, of course. And before, so while people take a little time to write their questions down, I just want to mention that, like Samir said, if you see a sea turtle that's stranded, there are numbers to call. And if you look on the NOAA Live website, we've listed there, you can look for your specific region of the United States and find the stranding number to call so that you have that. And also, if you are local or not, our National Marine Life Center in Buzzards Bay has 36 Kemp's Ridley turtles right now that they're rehabbing because they were cold stunned, just like Samir talked about. And on Saturdays at 11, they do a patient update. So on Facebook Live, you can see some of their turtle patients if you're interested in taking a look at that. And that link is also on our website. Okay, so one of the questions that came in, Samir, is Carol asks, if you do see a stranded turtle, is there something you should do? Should you cover them until rescue gets there? Should you do anything to help the turtle?
So that's a great question. You should first immediately call or contact your stranding network. Every area has slightly different protocols based on how they want to handle a turtle, because every environment's different, every turtle is different. So you want to make sure you contact your stranding network first, and then they can lead you down the steps of how to take care of that turtle. Usually there would be certain protocols that they would like to follow. So I don't want to say one thing or another, because every organization is going to have the thing that works best for the turtle in that specific situation and for the organization when they retrieve the turtle and take care of it. So it's really critical to call those stranding networks. So have your cell phone handy. And the other thing I can say is always take pictures. Pictures are extremely useful. So those two things, instead of touching the turtle, instead of putting something on the turtle, call the phone number and take pictures. Those are always very, very helpful.
Excellent advice. And when I've called the number, when I've found strandings, they'll tell you what to do as well. You can ask them any questions that you have. Another great question, Jasper wonders where your sea turtle samples came from. So those sea turtles that you showed us.
Yep. So those were, unfortunately, they were stranded turtles that did not make it. So those turtles were part of that group that strand on Massachusetts beaches. And like I said, 80% survive, but there are 20% that don't survive. And so we actually collect a lot of scientific information from that 20% that don't survive. Every single one of them gets what's called a necropsy, which is basically an autopsy is what's done on humans. A necropsy is what's done on dead animals. And so we learn a ton about what happened to these animals, why they were more susceptible to dying than the ones that didn't die. And then if we have the opportunity, we're able to taxidermy them and save them for educational purposes and demonstrations and to show you all sea turtles.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we have another great question from Brian. And Brian asks, out of all the species of sea turtles you have studied, what was the most unique and why?
So I think leatherbacks are probably the most unique. I'll go into a little detail as to why they're the most unique, but there's something very exciting about interacting with an animal that is just so big. It just is and they're pretty docile, so it's not like there's any fear of getting hurt by this animal per se, but they're just so massive, and there's just something pretty interesting about dealing with first wildlife, because you never know what you're going to expect. Wildlife is wild, but then something so big as well is just it's like dealing with a living dinosaur.
Okay, one last question before I let you move on, because I love these kinds of questions. Andrea asks, is that your favorite? What's your favorite sea turtle?
Oh, well, my favorite sea turtle is actually the loggerhead turtle. That's the one I've spent the most time with. That was the first sea turtle I interacted with. It's a sea turtle I've spent about 10 years now studying, so it'd have to be the loggerhead turtle. They're also the loggerhead is sort of like a slang word for someone that's pretty stubborn. So I think everybody sees themselves a little bit as a loggerhead. So I think they have a lot of human qualities to them. Maybe I just see myself in loggerheads a bit too much.
So next time when your parents or the person you live with says you're being stubborn, just say that you're trying to act like a loggerhead.
Exactly.
All right, I'm going to hand it back to you, Samir, and I'll hold on to the rest of the questions.
Great, thank you. So perfect segue. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about loggerhead turtles. Those are two pictures of loggerheads that we've taken with some of our tools. A little bit more background about them. They're very generalized animals. They feed on a lot of different things: jellyfish, dead fish, crabs, scallops. They'll just kind of feed on whatever they can get their mouth on. And then they feed in a variety of different areas. So they'll feed near the surface on jellyfish, they'll feed at the bottom on crabs, and then they also nest in a variety of different areas. So they have a very large range of nesting beaches. So typically nesting beaches are in more Caribbean habitats, or tropical habitats rather. But loggerheads occasionally nest in the Carolinas, far outside of what's typically considered tropical environment. So that's what it means by they're very generalized. Then they're also found globally, but the majority of nesting actually occurs in Florida. So they're a very US based turtle in a lot of ways. There's about 100,000 nests a year in Florida. And if you go to some of the beaches there, like Vero Beach or West Palm or Melbourne, you can actually go onto the beach in the summer, particularly from May to October. And if you sit there, you are likely to see a loggerhead turtle crawl up on the beach and nest. If you do that, don't interact with the turtle, but sit quietly, and you can experience something pretty magical. And so even though they're found globally, so in that map, they're actually, that bluish green color is where loggerheads are generally found. Even though they're found globally, they are endangered. But locally to us in the Northwest Atlantic, they're actually threatened. So they're not as endangered as they are in the rest of the world. And when they are older, rather like the turtle I showed you, when they're about 15, 20 years and older, so late stage juveniles and adults, they tend to be closer to shore. And so closer to shore means in water that's shallower than 200 meters deep, which is equivalent to about 30 stacked Christmas trees. And for the ocean, 200 meters deep is actually pretty shallow. It sounds pretty deep, but it's actually fairly shallow for the ocean. So we study loggerheads in several different ways. We put satellite tags on them to track them through the computer systems. We take their blood, we take tissue samples, but then we also, to get a sense of what they're doing, to see through their world, we will go out and film them. And so the way in which we do that is we go out into the ocean on a research boat or a fishing boat that's not actively fishing, and we go look for them. We usually go to areas where we know there will likely be sea turtles. So we're not just looking blindly into the ocean. We kind of have a sense that there likely will be some sea turtles here. And when we see a turtle, we actually deploy what's called a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV. And this ROV has a camera on it. And with that camera, we can actually send that ROV out into the ocean. It has propellers and film the turtle from the boat. And so we send out the ROV. We have an ROV operator who's watching from the view of the ROV. And when we see the turtle, the ROV goes out and it's tethered to the boat. So it can only go as far away as that tether. That tether is about 250 meters or so. So it can go pretty far, but not forever. And once we get that turtle in view, we try and watch it for as long as we can. And so here is a short video of what that process is like. So I'll play that now. So the ROV is on deck, this fishing boat. And in the top there, his name is Shay. He was our ROV operator at the time. And a turtle was spotted somewhere out into the ocean, and they dropped the ROV in to go look for it. And what you first notice when the ROV goes in the ocean, it's hard to know which way is up or down or left or right. So you kind of have to orient yourself which way you want to drive that ROV to try and get that turtle. So you have a lot of people on board spotting for you and helping you find that turtle. And eventually you drive it in the right direction and you get that sea turtle right in view. And you try and stick with it as long as you can. And it's not always easy, but we have good ROV operators. And what's amazing about sea turtles is they usually have fish around them. And the reason they have fish around them is because they're kind of floating sanctuaries. They're fairly big animals. They're protected with their shells. So they don't have many many predators. They do have some, but they don't have many. And because of that, small fish can sort of align themselves with sea turtles. They can sort of hang out around them and feel protected from other animals. They also can eat some of the things that grow on sea turtles, like algae and barnacles. And they can also eat some of the scraps that the turtles might leave behind if they can't get everything into their mouth. Turtles have to breathe air, so they do spend a lot of time at the surface. So they'll spend about 5-10 minutes at the surface, maybe a little longer. They'll take a breath, they'll go back under, swim a little bit, come back up, take a breath, and then they'll try to dive to the bottom. So this turtle is just hanging out at the surface there, or near surface, just sort of resting between breaths. The ROV doesn't seem to bother the sea turtles all that much. This turtle didn't seem concerned with the ROV whatsoever and was approaching it. What's also interesting, though, is we thought the sea turtle might have been approaching the ROV, where in fact it was approaching this, what's called an egg veil. So all those little dots are eggs, and it's on this membrane that looks like a veil. And so the sea turtle was just trying to take a bite of it, seemed pretty curious. And that's a really good example as to why we don't want plastic in the ocean. That looked a lot like plastic or a plastic bag. And that sea turtle immediate reaction was to try and bite it. So we don't want to put plastics in the ocean or balloons, things like that. And then a lot of the times, sea turtles do dive to the bottom, and occasionally, because they're pretty quick divers, we're able to follow them down and see what they're doing down there. Usually when they're down there, they're feeding on crabs, hermit crabs, things like that. But occasionally they'll just go down and relax. And turtles will exhibit what's called negative buoyancy. So that means that as they're diving, the air in their body will get compressed, and they'll just sink to the bottom, and they'll be able to just hang out at the bottom without floating back to the surface. And this turtle decided to come up to the ROV and kind of buddy up to it and seem to just want to relax with the ROV. All right, before I move on, were there any questions about loggerheads and the world of loggerheads?
We do have some questions. I'm glad you stopped. This is Grace from the chat box.
Great.
So Carol asks, have you ever gone swimming with a loggerhead?
Have I ever gone swimming with a loggerhead? I don't know if I've gone swimming intentionally with a loggerhead, but I have been swimming in water and a turtle has been nearby. I haven't, it's not like a dolphin event where you go swimming with dolphins, but I have been swimming in areas and then seen a turtle go by. That has happened, but it wasn't as intentional as, you know, there's a loggerhead, let's go swim with it kind of thing.
Excellent. And Calvin asks, how long can a loggerhead stay underwater?
So that is a very, very interesting question. So it really depends on what that turtle is doing. So in that example, where the turtle is just going down to relax or going down to forage, they usually go down for about 40 minutes or so. But sea turtles, being reptiles, do exhibit a thing where they kind of hibernate a little bit. And when they're in that hibernation stage, is usually in the cold months, being in the winter months, they can be down underwater for about 12 hours. So they will reduce all their needs of their body, and they will just rest at the bottom for hours on end, then come back up, take a breath, and then go right back down and relax. So it depends on the time of year, but the longest ones are around 10 to 12 hours.
Great. And Sky from, excuse me, Mr. Kassenbaum's class is wondering, are there any predators of loggerheads? What likes to eat the loggerhead?
Yeah, so the marine environment's kind of interesting. The food chain can be, in a lot of situations, if you're bigger than something, then you try to eat it. So bigger sharks, bigger animals that are bigger than sea turtles, that are also carnivorous, will try to eat sea turtles. And that usually includes sharks. So there are occasions, and sometimes it's been filmed, and sometimes it's been tracked, where people think that their tag that was on a turtle was eaten by a shark. So there are occasions where turtles will be eaten by sharks. There are also occasions where sea lions, larger mammals like that will go after sea turtles, because larger mammals can be a little bit smarter, a little bit better understanding of how to deal with a big shell on an animal, whereas a fish just will try and bite whatever it can get. And so there are occasions where some larger marine mammals will go after sea turtles, but that's pretty rare as well.
Excellent. And we got a question from Brian. Brian wonders, when you talked about taking tissue and blood samples, what information are you looking for? Why are you taking those samples?
So we're looking for a lot of things. In the blood samples, we look to see what their health status is like. So when you get your blood drawn at a doctor's office, they have all these different little things they look for in your blood, different chemical compositions, different metals, different elements that are in your blood, and different types of cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, things like that in your blood, to sort of get a sense of your health status. We do the same thing with sea turtles. We have a full panel of information that we can look at for turtles, similar to a human. We use very similar human blood analysis techniques, and we can get their health status. Then we also take these tissues to get a sense of their genetic composition. So we can tell what part of the population they are. Did they nest in Florida? Did they nest in some other part of America? Did they nest somewhere else? We can get that information from genetics. And then the other thing is we get what's called stable isotope information, and that is specific chemical composition that tells us what types of things that animal is eating. So it's the classic example of you are what you eat. So the chemicals we look for in this stable isotope study are the chemicals you would obtain from eating. So there's a few different things that we get from the tissue samples, and it all relates to getting a better understanding of what sea turtles are doing in the environment.
Great, thank you. Very comprehensive answer. And there are some more questions, but you know what? I'm going to let you, I know you have some really cool things to show us. So I'm going to be recording the questions that we've got, and I'll ask you them in a little bit once you've shown us some information about leatherbacks. So off to you.
Great, thank you. So yeah, next I'll be talking about leatherback turtles. So I showed you examples of loggerheads and kemps and green turtles, and in the back behind me under that kid's drawing of a giraffe, there's actually a hawksbill. But leatherbacks, I don't have a leatherback shell, and that there's a few reasons for that. First, they're humongous. Second, the leatherback shell doesn't retain like these other turtles. These other turtles are called hard shell turtles, in which their bones are fused and then they have a hard shell on top. Leatherback bones are not fused and their shell isn't as hard on top. So there wouldn't be anything like this left over if a leatherback died. So they are also found globally, and they're found in much larger area than loggerheads. They go way further north into really cold water, into Canadian waters, north of Europe there. So they can really handle really cold water, and that relates to the fact that they are so big. They can create a lot of body heat and retain that body heat. But then the largest nesting aggregations are in South America and West Africa. And like I said, they're humongous. They can get up to 2,000 pounds. And that is equivalent to that specific make and model car. I looked up a car that was about 2,000 pounds, and that was one. So they can be very, very large. And even though they're that large, all they really eat is jellyfish. As adults, they basically are just looking throughout the world's oceans for jellyfish. And the way that which they can eat jellyfish is that they consume it, and then they have what are called papillae. So these sort of fang-looking things, which are not sharp, they're actually kind of soft, are able to keep the jellyfish from flowing back out of the mouth. So it keeps food from going in instead of coming back out. And that's not particularly unique to leatherbacks. Other sea turtles have these papillae, but it is kind of a unique thing to sea turtles. And then, unfortunately, even though they're found throughout the world and they're these huge nesting aggregations in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, they're considered critically endangered. And a lot of this is because of fishing activity. It's uncontrolled fishing activity that are causing leatherback turtles to suffer in the Pacific. So how do we see the world through their eyes? So with loggerheads, we use what's called an ROV to film them from a bit of a distance. With leatherbacks, because of their unique body, because they have a smooth skin like leather, we are actually able to put the camera directly on them and actually see from their perspective. So I actually have that camera. So this is the camera here that's in the picture. And this right here is the camera. It's a dive camera that you can just buy off of Amazon. And it films for about 3 hours. And it also records temperature and depth. And this is a tag that, you know, it clearly doesn't look manufactured in a plant or anything like that. It looks a little bit of a Frankenstein look to it. And it's because we built this thing. We bought these parts and put this together. And the other major component on here is a satellite transmitter. And this thing records and transmits location, and then also records dive behavior, so depth and temperature and dive duration and things like that. And then there's suction cups. So because this leatherback has smooth skin and it's with the aid of the water, the suction cups stick to the turtle really, really well and can hold onto the turtle for hours. Then this let's see, how can I show you that? That sort of white metal thing there, that's actually a release. So it is a special metal that dissolves at a very specific rate in the ocean. And we know that rate when we buy that thing, we put it on there. And so after a set amount of time, let's say 3 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, whatever that rate of dissolving is, it'll break and it'll release the tag from the turtle. And then the tag flips up. This whole orange thing is floating material. It flips up and floats. And it floats like this in the water. And we have this secondary antenna here that then we have a device on our boat to receive the information from this transmitter and find the tag in the water. So it releases off the turtle, it floats in the water, and then we find it with this antenna here. All right. So how we interact with a leatherback is, sorry about that, is pretty similar to how we interact with a loggerhead. We first go out and try and spot them. But in this case, we're in an area where we know there are leatherbacks, but there's not nearly as many. So as a result, we have a pilot that helps us look for turtles, and the pilot in an airplane. And that airplane can just have a much larger view of the ocean and can see a little bit further underwater and can find turtles for us a lot better than we can from the boat. But then when we see that turtle, what we do is we want to get the tag on the animal. So we line up the boat behind the turtle. We don't want to spook it, so we go behind the turtle so it can't see us approach it. And we have a specially designed platform that's attached to the boat, and that's me lying down there. And we drive up behind the turtle and we put the tag on it, just like that. And it's a pretty, getting the tag on the turtle is a pretty quick process, but spotting the turtle and lining the boat up can take a bit of time. And so here is a little bit of video of what it's like to tag a leatherback. So it's pretty quick. There was a leatherback. I just put the tag on it and off it goes. And so it's pretty quick, so we can watch that again. So the leatherback is up here. That's me on the platform. And then this is this orange space right here is the boat. And the tag goes on. And again, putting a suction cup onto an object does not take very long. If you just take a suction cup and push it on something, it takes about a second. And the leatherback gets that tag and off it goes, and it seems to behave normally as if the tag wasn't there. It doesn't seem to be very bothered by that tag. And I'll explain a little bit more as to why we think that's the case. So the next video then is actually what it looks like to deploy the tag from the tag itself, from the camera on the tag. And so to set this up a little bit, right there is our airplane pilot looking for turtles. And down at the bottom there, you see these white dots. That's actually the leatherback turtle. And so I'll hit play here. That's my face. And turtles come up to the surface to breathe, like I mentioned earlier with the loggerheads. And so when this turtle comes up to the surface to breathe, we get close to it and we can put the tag right on it and off it goes. It's a very smooth process. And once the tag's on the turtle, it's already recording and it's seeing the view from the turtle's eyes. And similar to loggerheads, there are fish associated with the leatherback. They're such a big animal. The waters that we're in right there have great white sharks. And so if you want to be something to avoid getting eaten by a great white shark, you find something really big and you go near that as well. And so the sharks might miss you if that's the case. So then what are the leatherback turtles doing when they're here? As I said earlier, they eat jellyfish, and because they're so big, they have to eat a ton of jellyfish. So what they're doing when they come here is, that's a turtle taking a breath, they're basically looking for jellyfish. And so the area in which we tag the turtles every season also has an influx of jellyfish. And so leatherbacks will swim into this area, and they're very similar to Pac-Man. They'll just keep munching jellyfish as they go along. And the jellyfish are pretty, substantially sized, but there are much bigger jellyfish in the world that the leatherbacks will also try and eat. Another interesting thing about leatherbacks is right here where my mouse is pointing, they have what's called a pink spot. And so all leatherbacks have this, and it's connected to a gland in their brain called a pineal gland. And people think that it helps them understand the difference between day and night. It's just another sort of sensory tool that they use to interpret their environment. And so again, they'll just swim through the area, consuming jellyfish as they go. And at the bottom here, we have the temperature and depth recorded from the camera. So the camera not only records it, but also projects it onto the video. And so this turtle's at 4 meters deep, which is about 12 feet. And it's about 17 degrees centigrade, which is about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not particularly deep, and it's a pretty average temperature for this area for that time of year. All right. And then, like I said, the leatherbacks don't seem to be bothered by the tag. And the reason we think that's true is because their behavior is consistent with what we would expect natural behavior to be. They just swim and eat. But they also seem to have friends, this remora, that stick to the turtles as well. So they have these fish that are associated with it that also latch onto the turtle, similar to the way that our tags latch onto the turtle. And this remora, which latches onto leatherbacks and sharks and whales and other big animals like that, they will feed off the leatherback, maybe eat some of the parasites, and also eat some of the scraps left over from the leatherback. And this one just so happened to land on the leatherback's head. And it doesn't seem like the leatherback is that bothered by it. It doesn't shake its head. It doesn't use its flipper to knock it off. It doesn't seem to do anything. And so we think these turtles seem to be pretty comfortable with something being stuck to their body just like that. The other unique thing about leatherbacks is, and sea turtles, this one's eating jellyfish as we saw, and there's jellyfish strains are going right over its face, and they don't seem to bother the turtle either. And so sea turtles have really tough skin, and so if we were interacting with a jellyfish, we would get stung all over, but the sea turtles don't seem to be having that situation or having that sensation happening to them. So they're able to eat jellyfish, they're able to handle these fish all around them and not get bothered, and so that's what it's like to see the world through a sea turtle's eyes. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I was really excited to get to the video where we got to see through a sea turtle's eyes. So I'm really excited that you showed that to us. And it's so great to see your team there. Just as a reminder, as Samir said, that as with all of the research that we're reporting on, it's really a team effort. So Samir, I do have a variety of questions. I'm gonna ask you if you don't mind to just hide your slides for now, and we'll do some speed questions. So I'll ask you a few questions and see if we can get a bunch of them answered before we're out of time. So let's see. So Angelina, some people had some questions about nesting when you were talking about nesting before. So Angelina asked, does light pollution interfere with sea turtle nesting?
It does. So if a turtle sees light, so an adult turtle seeing light might get spooked by it, and so they might come onto the beach. There might be some really bright lights, and that really might bother the turtle's eyes. They nest at night, usually. Not all turtles nest at night. Some do nest during the day, but they usually nest at night. And so at night, you're not expecting really bright lights. If you wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, you flick the light on, your eyes get really bothered. So similarly, adult sea turtles that come onto the beaches that are really bright can get spooked. Then when turtles are born, so the hatchling turtles, so the little babies will crawl out of the nest, and they actually do this completely independently. There's no parental care for this to happen. So they hatch out of the eggs, they crawl out of the sand, and they tend to follow a bright light, thinking that it's the moon. So a lot of times turtles will go towards the street lights instead of going towards the ocean. And so this will cause these hatchlings to go onto roads, essentially to not go into their natural habitat of the ocean and to go the wrong way. And then they end up getting run over by cars, or they get lost and they end up starving, things like that. So light pollution can be an issue. And so a lot of communities actually turn off their lights at night. They put blockers on the lights so they only shine towards the street and not towards the beaches. Yep.
And I think that answers, Seth had some questions if there were penalties for disturbing nests and how are they protected. So those are some of the ways that folks that live near sea turtle nesting can help protect them. Yep. And Katie asks, when you see their tracks on the beach, you just talked about them coming up on the beach, can you tell the difference between the different types of species just by looking at the tracks?
You can. So some turtles will walk up the beach and alternating flippers, similar to how we walk with our feet, alternating. We don't sort of hop. We walk alternating our feet. So some turtles will come up alternating. Some turtles come up using both flippers at once. And so the tracks will look slightly different depending on the sea turtle species that comes up to nest. The other thing is the size of the track. If it's a really, really wide track, then it's likely a leatherback. If it's a narrower track, then it's one of the smaller turtles. So there are indicators. They're pretty subtle, but there are indicators in the tracks as to which turtle has come up to nest. Yep.
Okay, and Sanika asks, and we want your true answer. Have you ever missed the sea turtle when you're trying to put the tag on?
Have I missed it? Ooh, sometimes it is out of reach. Yes, it's not like we go up and every time it's 100% shot. We approach the turtle at the best opportunity that we get in that situation. So sometimes the examples I showed were clearly the best situations we are in. But on occasion, we approach the turtle and we're a little late, and the turtle has just gone under, and I reach my hand in the water and I miss it. So yes, it does happen on occasion. Michael Jordan missed a few shots occasionally, so.
Awesome. I'm glad that you were honest with us. And I know you already answered this, but I think it's worth saying again because Carmen asked, does it seem to hurt the turtle to have things attached to their back?
So it really is dependent on what's attached to their back and in what way a thing is attached to their back. A suction cup really isn't doing much harm to a turtle. We've encountered turtles that we've suction cupped before and we don't notice any indicator of the suction cup. The cup doesn't really leave any damage to the turtle at all. If you suction cup to yourself, you really don't feel any repercussions from that. But there are other types of tags that do leave a little bit more of an impact. So satellite tags are computerized tags that send out a signal through a satellite system. And these tags stay on turtles for a long time, months to years. And so because of that long-term need, the way that they're attached is slightly different. Sometimes they're glued on and sometimes they're tethered on. And these approaches can be a little bit more stressful to the turtle, but they're short-term stress. So the stress is only during the attachment process, and then we think the turtle sort of returns to natural behavior when it's in the ocean.
Excellent. Well, I have to tell you, there's just still so many questions. People are really, really
Sure.
fascinated by sea turtles, but we're at about the right amount of time. We're about 4:45, and I want to be respectful of people's time. So maybe you and I can get together and do some FAQs for some of the questions that didn't get answered. But I'll leave you with one last one, and this is Liam. Liam asks, why did you join NOAA? Why did you start doing this research?
So I was, like I said earlier on in the talk, I have always had a fascination with wildlife. And in graduate school, I was very lucky. I went to graduate school specifically just to do marine ecology. So just do something in the ocean environment. And I was very lucky that the opportunity was presented to do sea turtle research. And so I jumped at that opportunity, and NOAA, being from America, coming back to America to find a job here, having spent time in different parts of the world working, NOAA is a leader in sea turtle research within our local environment, within Florida, within California, within all parts of the country. So to do sea turtle research in America, one of the biggest opportunities to do that is to align yourself and work very closely with NOAA. And so through Coonamessett Farm Foundation and through work with NOAA, I'm able to sort of live out a little bit of my dreams of not only working with wildlife, but working with the species that I've had a really good opportunity to interact with and study in sea turtles.
Excellent. And I will say
Yeah.
you are very lucky, because when I was talking to them earlier, when I was talking to Samir and asking about seeing sea turtles, even though they're around, we don't necessarily see them. So even though
Yes.
it might be the right time of year for sea turtles to be here, they are very elusive and very
Hmm.
hard to spot. So Samir is very lucky he gets to spend so much time with sea turtles. And with that, we are out of time. So I just want to thank you, Samir, again. Really,
Sure.
really exciting to see your video footage. Really interesting to see the tag that you designed to sort of solve a
Yeah.
problem yourselves. And think about, so I encourage you, the students that are watching, to think about ways that you could build something that might answer a science question for you. And just thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us. For those of
Great.
you that are interested in our webinar next week, we're going to be talking about abalone on the California coast. Really, really interesting marine snails, but that doesn't sound exciting. So think about abalone. So we'll see you next Wednesday at 4 p.m. And there's some really, really excellent footage of abalone moving, which they move much slower than the turtle footage you showed us. So until next week, thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you. We'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks, Samir.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good one.